As Numa Sepper rightly pointed out, it is not the case that because you have a preference, you will always see it in the behavior, and that you can always tell somebody's preference from their behavior. For example, my black sheepness most tangibly demonstrates itself in my notoriously bad not taking people's recommendations. For example, for books and movies. Like, people will say, oh, this is a great movie, you need to see it, you'll love it. Now I don't want to. On some level, even though this is actually not rational. This is not rational. Do not confuse TI with Vulcan-like logic, because it's not always. I'm very aware of that, but that's okay. Or, so this book, you know, I thought of you the entire time I was reading it. I'm like, well, I was gonna want to read that book now, but meh. So, to me, if somebody says that I will like something, it stirs something inside that screams, you can't make me like it. Which, again, non-rational, but it's the way it is. Now, TI preferenced people are definitely not the only people who can fail to follow up on recommendations. Even from people that they generally trust will, you know, understand what I do and do not like. I thought of some possible examples. Other NPs, all NPs, so people with extroverted intuition as their dominant or auxiliary function. It is entirely possible that it will simply consistently, constantly slip our minds. That is totally possible with any NP. We'll just forget about it until you mention it again. Also, I imagine that SJs may decline to go out and follow up on a recommendation if they are if they don't have previous experience with maybe that genre, that author, that whatever, and they just don't have that backup of SI database to feel comfortable with it. Not to say that all SJs never do anything new. I'm just saying that might be one reason why an SJ might not follow up on a recommendation. So it's not about what you do, it's about how you do it. And I do it because it slips my mind. It really happens a lot. And because I'm, yes, mislike being told what I will and will not like. Biggest example, doing Shakespeare. So there's the series that I haven't seen yet, a series of interviews with actors that I love, amazing actors like Patrick Stewart, right? Really good, classically trained, widely experienced Shakespearean actors just talking about and workshopping various Shakespeare stuff. I love Shakespeare, it's my favorite thing in the world, and these actors that I really respect their work, they're talking about the theoretical and the application, and they're doing Shakespeare, and people have told me so many times that I need to see this. So whenever I have the opportunity, I just never seem to actually look for it. I did once. I looked for it once and I couldn't find it, and that was all of the attempt that I had in me to make. It's all I had. And so maybe in another 6 months I will have more attempt in me to make, especially if nobody manages to say, you have to see this, you would love it. And I know I would love it, right? I actually objectively, or actually, actively, I actively want to see this thing, but when people tell me to, so this is a negative example, right? It's not that TI, everybody thinks that TI seems like it would be such a superior, or that TI users think that they're superior or something, because it's objective and impersonal and not clouded by emotion. This is not entirely true, obviously, and no function is without its drawbacks. This is a fact. And wise people who are into cognitive functions or MBTI or any other kind of typology will understand their own limitations and try to work around them. Anyway, so that was a limitation. A good thing, a very good thing that I've used TI for is I have reinvented grammar. I teach English as a second language, and of course, part of that is teaching English grammar, which everybody loves because it's so exciting. But let me tell you, when I teach it, it is, because it's a living, breathing thing of verbs that exhibit behavior that you're stalking in the jungle and observing in their natural habitat, etc. So, and when I do anything teaching related, not just grammar, but when I'm creating a test, when I'm creating an activity, when I'm figuring out how I'm going to explain a concept or a skill, I always start with what makes sense to me. In the very beginning, and this is because I'm an NT specifically, because TI is working with NE, and I'll talk about that in a little more explanation later. I have to understand the framework, not just the thing. I don't just have to understand the decision that I'm making in front of me. I have to understand the theoretical framework of what I'm doing or how the skill should be executed before I can go freewheeling on it, before I can wield it, have to become master of my domain. So when I first started teaching, I did what everybody else does, right? You start with a textbook. They told me what textbook to use. I stuck to it like glue, and I hated it. Oh, I hated my first semester teaching. It was so boring, and I was terrified that I was doing it wrong. But as I got more experience, and as I realized that, oh, I do actually understand what's going on here, I started seeing ways that I could take pieces that nobody had been connecting in any of these textbooks that I ever used. Nobody did anything useful or new with the information. It was all the same way. The way that the old dudes in armchairs 250 years ago put together English grammar is the way it's still being taught. And it actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There's a reason why everybody hates grammar, and yeah, English does have a lot of exceptions because of its history, but it doesn't have to be so unmanageable. It really doesn't. And I could see these things, number one, because of my degree in linguistics, but number two, because I was always looking for a way to explain it that made sense to me. Right, that TI drive for, I have to understand why I'm doing this. It includes the way I was explaining grammar to my students. So a fantastic example of this, I have some stuff that's hopefully going to be published, so I won't put that in there. But a fantastic example is what constitutes a complete sentence. Right, this is one of the most boring things in all creation. A complete sentence expresses a complete idea. Really? Expresses a complete idea. Number one, that's patently false, because we speak in sentence fragments all the time, and nobody is confused in the slightest as to what we mean, because context supports it. But even then, there's such a thing as discourse. And even when you have even when you have a complete sentence, it's still context dependent, because you have pronouns that refer to something that happened in the previous sentence. You have transitions like therefore that you can start a sentence with that require you to know what the cause was before you can interpret the therefore. So what's the difference between starting with therefore and starting with because, other than therefore introduces the effect and because introduces the cause? Nothing! Logically, it's not internally consistent. It makes... How am I supposed to explain that to my students? I almost said kids, but some of them are my age and some of them are older. That I can't do that. I can't... It's bad. So I invented Jen's 3 laws of complete sentence structure. I think the Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. So... here. Backwards. My brain is not good at mirror imaging. Okay. Yes. So you see that the number of clauses NCL has to equal the number of conjunctions plus 1. Really simple. So for every, well, not for every, so the total number of conjunctions, coordinating or subordinating, that you have in the sentence must be exactly 1 less than the total number of clauses. Okay? Simple. And that's how you avoid a lot of sentence fragments. Also, the number of independent clauses, NIC, must be greater to or equal than 1. What's an independent clause, you ask? Well, an independent clause consists of a subject plus a verb, you probably can't see this, that has tense and aspect. I will not describe that one at the moment, plus whatever else comes after the verb. See also Rule 3. I don't know how in set theory to describe something that must not be there. I will eventually look this up. So you cannot start an independent clause with a subordinator. That's the only requirement. And then finally, all verbs are happy. What makes a verb happy, do you ask? Well, a verb is happy when all its semantic and syntactic subcategories are filled, which is linguistic talk for if it has tense and aspect, then it needs a subject. And different verbs have different requirements for what might come after it. Some verbs don't require anything. Some verbs require adjectives, nouns, noun clauses, gerunds or infinitives. Some are exceptional case marking verbs, and they're really funky. But other than that, right, so there are approximately 6 categories of verbs, and knowing which ones require what frames, what the logical relationship of those nouns is to the action of the verb or the state of the verb, and that's the semantic frame, and which verbs can be used in multiple frames. That's the hard part, but it's absolutely essential to usage. So it's complicated in some sense, but is an actual definition. It's not must express a complete thought, which is total nonsense, and it will increase your usage, the correct usage, not just is this sentence complete. It will help you use the words the way they want to be used, not the way you're going to stab at it with a fork and hope that it works, right? So, yes, that is a taste of my reinvention of grammar. And that is a thing that TI is very good for, right? Is to see something different and appreciate it for what it is, not what it isn't. Obviously, this is also a work of TI in service of extroverted intuition, right? Because the whole reinventing the wheel, that's what NE is for. So because I'm an ENTP, my extroverted intuition is dominant over my introverted thinking. And that means that while my TI is strong, the TI is strong with this one, it's not dominant. It's not calling the shots. And sometimes I think about what it must be like to have that function, which I feel strongly, but be so huge in my mind, you know, that it TI DOMs in the house represent, you know, that it the drive toward that kind of consistency and clarity, it would be so huge. But that's just thinking, thought experiment. What I do in real life is think of infinite possibilities, or just a lot of them. Actually, okay, so I have compared NE to lightning, and I had an epiphany in the car on the way home, and I'm so sad that it didn't occur to me right now, because one of these days I am going to record an NE epiphany. Hello, yubs. This was like an NE epiphany. It just leaps at you in a virulent manner and decides to land on your shoulder. And makes you lose your train of thought because you're such a cute and cuddly kitty. Anyway, what am I thinking? I'm thinking that Yubs is so cute and distracting. If you just sit down for a minute. There, thank you. Okay. Okay. Any is like lightning, not just in some hyperbolic metaphor, but it's actually a really, really good analogy. In fact, it's just about perfect. Because one of the things that I do is I try to get people to answer hard questions for me. Okay? So an example of a hard question is, why do computers know that 00001 is A? How do they know that? Right? It's not, how do computers work? Well, they use computer language, but how do computers know what computer language is? Right? So that's an example of a hard question. One of the hard questions that I had answered for me was, how does lightning know where to strike? Because lightning is not checking the bottom of your shoes to see if they're rubber. It's not. And it's not, looking over all of the cars and say, excuse me, do you have rubber tires, or are you grounded? If you're grounded, thank you. It's not doing that, right? So how does a lightning know where to strike? And the beautiful answer is, because lightning is electricity, and don't forget that electricity is also magnetism, the electromagnetic force. It's the same thing, and it just senses out the magnetic potential generated by the Earth's core. That's why it goes to ground. It's going to the core because that's the source of all the magnetic potential. So lightning is static electricity searching out the path of greatest potential. That's exactly like extroverted intuition. It just, and then zing, where it goes. Sorry, kitty. That's, yeah, it's exactly what it's like. It's like you have a constant stream of lightning running through your brain, or whenever you're really in the zone. And clearly thinking about this analogy is getting me in the zone, because you start to talk really, really fast and nobody understands what you're talking about, but it's so much cool and you want them to understand because it's so cool. It also makes me wonder, why are people ever bored? Why are people bored? Why are they unhappy? Why do they talk about their mortgages? Why would you think about these things when there's lightning to be had for the enjoyment? This is also why ENTPs and ENFPs are known to have the highest need coping mechanisms. Because, there's stuff going on in my life, but it's still cool, at least parts of it, and I can be very happy about those parts. Anyway, that was any, right? So TI is taking the lightning and driving it and harness and pointing it in directions, or is pulling useful things, decisions, actions, beliefs out of the lightning, creating Boolean strings of and or operators, as I think TypeLogic webpage said. That's what my TI is doing. So obviously it has a strong relationship with NE, but it also has relationships with the other functions. TI in everybody is always necessarily balanced by FE, no matter which way it's pointing. If you're TI dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, inferior, or if it's in your shadow, TI is always balanced by FE. And so there's always an element of the internal consistency also has to value on some level the utility of honoring the emotional or subjective needs of the people who matter. Now, defining the people who matter is partially a function of how high TI is on your hierarchy, and partially due to your upbringing and yada, yada, yada. But there will be people who matter to you somehow, somewhere. Whether or not you have a good relationship with them, there will be people who matter to you. And how they feel about things and how these things are going to affect them is going to play a role in your otherwise independent and objective choices and beliefs. I've talked ad nauseum about my FE, so that's how that works. A less well developed or less well explored connection, if my TI is auxiliary, my other introverted function, SI, introverted sensing, which I have talked about in connection with NE, I have not talked about in connection with my TI. Because, you know, when I'm all introverted and back in my own head, TI is rolling, but it's rolling on a bank of information that I have accumulated through and in introverted sensing. This is my database of everything that I know, which of course has been filtered through my intuition that thinks things are interesting, but I have a sizable database of things that I know. And the interesting result of pairing TI with SI is you get this absolutely incontrovertible, immutable, and implacable sense of truth. It's not as strong in an ENTP as it is in an INTP, which presumably would be the strongest. And, you know, many different types have the sense of truth, but the sense of truth is different. Truth means something different to different types based on their preferences. But the TI-SI kind of truth is crystalline and inviolable and has absolute command. There's, pardon the bark, there's nothing that you can argue against that truth. Like, I'm sorry, your argument is invalid. Sorry, that's just it. Pardon one moment again.